It's a conversation that I want to have, that I get to have, and try to communicate to that 12-year-old kid, just like had a telescope. This is years before Google was invented. Nevertheless, if there was some, kind of melding of nanotechnology where you could connect to the physical world from the digital world of AI, where it has some imperative. Hello, and welcome to a very, very special and exciting 100,000 subscriber milestone episode of the Into the Impossible podcast with yours truly, Dr. Brian Keating. Didn't think I would hit this milestone so soon, perhaps. I really started the channel in earnest back in the year 2020. That channel was around for a few years before that, getting, a couple subscribers a year since 2017, 2018. But I really kicked it into full gear in 2020 and was delighted to see the exponential virality of the show continue to grow in a hockey stick fashion, to which I have become accustomed and inured. But I don't take it for granted. It's really a tremendous value to me. It causes me so much joy and gratitude to you all. So I'm excited to keep making videos for you. I have so many cool ideas for solo episodes and for new guests coming up. Booked deep into the fall of this year, 2023, and that will hopefully take us to 150,000 subscribers before the end of the year. That would be quite phenomenal. And we'll do another BK Q&A at that milestone. So stay tuned for that. I couldn't do any of this really without all of you. So incredibly blown away and super, super duper thankful. And so I solicited questions on Twitter, on Instagram, especially on YouTube in the comments section. So just really, again, I implore you to take the opportunity to ask questions there, to follow me and subscribe over there and all these different venues, most importantly on YouTube. But I'm also active on Instagram and Twitter, same handle, Dr. Brian Keating, with Dr. Brian Keating. And you can find me there. I kind of refuse to do Twitter on moral grounds, on personal grounds. Maybe I'm missing out on some really important, viewers that would subscribe to this channel. I don't know. Be that as it may, can't really complain because this milestone was really a long time coming. I had spoken before, I thought it would happen maybe eventually before the heat death of the universe. But I actually kind of feel, given the amount of high quality guests that I get on, from 14 Nobel Prizes winners and 3 Pulitzer Prize winners and 4 astronauts and 5 billionaires and some people that are very little known, but equally impressive, that I think the channel deserves even more subscribers. And I was joking with one of my friends that if I ever talked about getting 1 million subscribers, I gave him permission to punch me in the face. And you know who you are out there. I'm not going to really talk about numerical values, just to say that I'd like it to grow. And we're already growing. We're at, by the time you're watching this, we'll be close to 115,000 subscribers. And it's not the number of subscribers, that you get buried with like a pharaoh, with his golden artifacts, but it's a way of, kind of documenting the quality of the channel too, because it's hard to get 100,000 people. That's bigger than, very many towns that I've lived in my life, and bigger, it's twice as big as the university that I teach at. So it's really quite gratifying to me to think there's 100,000, 115,000 of you right as of now. But I do feel like we can take the message of connecting 1 million minds together, literally, and through your help, we can do that. I'll say more about that later. Now I want to get on to the questions. So got hundreds of questions, can't answer them all. I want to thank you all. And again, you can ask me on Twitter, Dr. Brian Keating, YouTube, Dr. Brian Keating, in the community section, or any of the comment sections. I read all the comments. I don't really, reply to all of them. I do try to read them, and on occasion you'll see a heart down there. So there, and on Twitter at Dr. Brian Keating, you can ask me questions. So I did get one from Instagram. I'll go to that second. But first, I want to start off with Tim Wilson on YouTube, who said, I remember about a year ago that I wished you this stat. In other words, 100,000. Congrats on 100,000. Thank you, Tim. I'm very, very grateful to you and the cohort of brilliant minds that listen and feedback. We do live events. It's really just so much fun. I always joke, when I'm working in Chile or in some project at the South Pole, we have to deal with people, contractors, and And, there's demands from the universities and the bureaucrats and the lawyers and stuff that those are people I have to talk to. But when I get to talk to you all and talk to my colleagues and friends that come on the podcast or do a solo episode that is with my favorite guest, which is me, then it's a conversation that I want to have, that I get to have. And I'm trying to kind of adopt that mindset for everything I do. Sometimes I catch myself saying, oh, I have to teach, now I have to go teach, have to go. And you just say it really quickly. Lately, I told my wife, I'm starting to say, I want to teach. I get to teach. I'm honored. I'm privileged to teach. I'll have more to say about that later. And as you know, my favorite cohort to teach are those that, are kind of taking the path that I was on decades ago, which are young students, either, graduating from high school, about to be college students, graduate students, postdocs, young professors, as well as just the interested layperson. My goal is that I provide free, content that you can consume that is really, it's free to you, but it costs me time and money to do it. But the reason I do that is because you pay my salary and you pay the salary of other scientists around the world. And the 100K figure allows, other people to see that there is a value in what we're doing. So the subscriber count is important, and it does have influence on publishers. I wanted a few years ago to get Ray Dalio on the podcast, famous, another billionaire. I'd love to have, he's a great thinker. I've read his books. And he declined, or his people declined. I don't have his email address handy. If you do out there, Ray, it's time to come on. At the time, maybe I had 20,000 subscribers. And his publicist basically said, thanks for the request, but channel's too small. It's not really worth his time. And I didn't say, how dare you? You'll live to regret that. No, of course, it makes total sense. And it's not the size of the audience, that really determines everything, nor is it the size of the followers of the guests that determine the quality. I've had some incredible interviews that have gotten tens of thousands of views with people that, no one has ever heard of in the general public. People know the Eric Weinsteins or, the Balaji's that I get on the podcast, Ryan Holiday, all these, famous quote unquote people, Ben Shapiro, Jordan Peterson. But very few people have heard of Neil Turok, and yet his episode has more than 250,000 views. Mark Kamiankowski came on. These are little-known intellects outside of a very, very niche cadre, a cohort of fellow astronomers or physicists like myself. But I bring them to you, and then I'm just delighted to see the response. And so that's sort of the mission that we're on. When I go back and look at Instagram, I got a couple questions over there. One I want to answer from my friends at Judaism Demystified. They had me on their podcast. They asked a question, what was I like as a young kid, as a scientist? Was I interested in science? So yeah, guys, I was interested in science. I was always interested in science. I just never thought you could do science as a career. I never thought it was possible to actually get, the knowledge of a scientist into my head and my body and have those experiences and learn from these minds. I didn't think I was qualified to be one of them. And that feeling, related to the imposter syndrome, I guess, is a common one. I deal with that in my books and with my guests. Try to bring them down to, an accessible reality so that a young person, 12-year-old, 13-year-old in the same position I was decades ago, will see that this is not so, mystical, that scientists are human beings despite the stereotypes. So I think, part of the scientific mission is to cultivate an aura of invincibility, of perfection, of being above the scrutability of the general public. Again, I think that's dangerous, not just for, kind of scientists and science itself, because science is dependent on the funding of people who aren't scientists. There's way more people who aren't scientists that fund scientists than there are actual scientists. So I think it's imperative that if we don't give back to the community and show what it's like to be a scientist, to teach, to educate the public on what we're really doing with their money, it's very perilous for the future of science. So I try to do that and try to communicate to that 12-year-old kid, who just had a telescope. This is years before Google was invented. This is years, before I'd really have my first big telescope and think about going to college and think that I could do something so impractical as astronomy or physics, because it's really not immediately obvious to a 12-year-old and even to an adult how valuable physics might be as a career. It turns out it's extremely valuable. the skills that my students garner are an incredible demand because it really spans the gamut from learning to code and program all the way up to understanding the deepest aspects of calculus and mathematics and theoretical physics, to experimental physics, to circuits, to optics, to thermodynamics, to engines, to rockets. Everything is contained within physics in the physical world. Even biology has a role in physics, and certainly chemistry. Dirac joked a long time ago that his Dirac equation of the relativistic form and the Schrodinger equation described most of physics and all of chemistry. And then, since chemistry is the foundation of biology and biochemistry, so all the more so, physics is at the root of all these subjects. So it seems sometimes impertinent or irrelevant, but actually it is the foundation, the operating system on which all of the physical universe works. So my job is to inspire those people. And the way that I was inspired was by authors. We didn't have YouTube channel, but we didn't have such things. So I relied on the OG original influencers, and then those were authors. They didn't even have audiobooks when I was a kid. It was very uncommon, at least. So for those reasons, I want to bring authors to the minds and the eyeballs of young listeners and old listeners too, to inspire them and to make them feel they could get some good ROI, return on their investment in the scientific endeavor that I'm privileged to be a part of. Okay, let's go to Twitter questions. So the first one comes from my friend Jeremy at Alien Scientist. He has a question with an image. Why is there a terahertz gap in the electromagnetic spectrum? Is there something special about those freaks and wavelengths? Not really freaky, Jeremy. There is really nothing special. There is no gap in the electromagnetic spectrum. There are band gaps in semiconductors that are related in this gap that you're showing here. There's a photon-polaron gap. Those are usually due to the crystal lattice structure. There's no missing band of frequencies where there are no electromagnetic waves, and the terahertz frequency especially. That's really not that exotic. It's what we call far infrared. We use it all the time. We've even measured photons from the earliest moments of the Big Bang, called the cosmic microwave background, and no problem with those. There's no gap that's been observed. Thank you for the question. Let's see, moving on to voytechgrabbyedge. He asks, how much does the known universe weigh? How much subatomic particles can you squeeze together before starting a chain reaction and expanding? How much force would be required to control the chain reaction explosion? Okay, there's three questions here. I'll just stick to one of them. We don't discuss what the universe weighs. Weight is really a byproduct of what we call force, which manifests itself on Earth as a product of the mass of all the particles that make up a given object, multiplied by the acceleration due to gravity of the entire Earth's force squeezing in and pulling in on those particles that are on the scale. The universe, there's no scale to put it on. There's no constant gravitational field to weigh it on. There's no force no net force, because that would prefer a direction in space, which we don't observe. So I'll take that question to mean something else, the mass of the universe. So the mass of the universe is actually equated to an energy via Einstein's E equals mc squared. And the total mass of the universe appears to be strangely, paradoxically, maybe not paradoxically, but strangely, it's equal to what's called the critical density. The critical density is that density which is required to create what's called a flat universe, a universe with no spatial curvature, a universe in which you shoot out two initially parallel laser beams, and they will remain parallel forever, which is not the case if there were spatial curvature to the universe, causing either them to diverge as they might in a positively curved universe, in a negatively curved universe like a saddle, or converge as they do in a positively curved universe like a sphere. So there is evidence that the universe has what's called the critical density. The critical density, when converted to mass, which then you could convert to weight if you really wanted to, but that would only apply on Earth. So you can't really think about putting the entire universe on a scale that happens to be on the Earth's surface that has no gravitational potential deviation. You hear a constant field. It doesn't exist. So let's just talk about the mass. The average mass of the universe per cubic meter is equivalent to about 5 protons. There are about 5 protons worth of energy in every cubic meter of space. A proton has a mass energy equivalent to what we call about 1 giga electron volt, 1 billion electron volts. So that's an energy required to accelerate an electron to have a potential of 1 billion volts. It's strange units. But remember, energy is equivalent to mass via E equals mc squared. So you can convert the electron volt mass, the 5 protons to a mass, or the electron volt energy to a mass. And then you could say how many electron volts there are. So it's about roughly 5 billion electron volts per cubic meter of energy, or 5 protons worth. Now, 70% of that is not in the form of matter at all. 70% of that energy equivalent is in the form of dark energy, which we know almost nothing about. We have almost no good theories about it. We know that it exists. Einstein thought it existed originally to keep the universe from collapsing. He needed an expansive anti-gravitational force to counteract the gravitational force of the matter that he was made up of. And so in the 19-teens, he came up with the theory of general relativity, applied it to the universe, which to him was just the Milky Way galaxy. He didn't know there were other galaxies until 1923, when Hubble proved that. And even after that, he still believed until 1929, when Hubble showed him the universe was expanding. Einstein believed that the universe was static. So I always joke, it's too bad. He could have had a good career if he didn't make that biggest blunder repeatedly, as he called it. So that's the mass energy of the universe. Most of it's in the form of dark energy. The remaining 30% is mostly dark matter. Again, something we know little about, maybe a little bit more than dark energy. We've never detected any form of dark energy. At least we've detected one form of dark matter, honest to goodness dark matter, and those are called neutrinos. Neutrinos are massive. They have a mass, very, very tiny, minuscule mass, but they have a mass. And we've detected their contribution to the cosmic energy budget. So they have mass, energy, and they're not interacting with light. They're dark matter, therefore, dark and massive. There's not enough of them to account for the 30% of matter that is comprising the rest of the cosmic pie chart. That is a conundrum. What is the dark matter made of? What is the ordinary matter made of? Now, what's so interesting is that if you look at the cosmic pie chart, the composition of the universe, so the pie chart, the cosmic energy budget, the elements that we're made up of, besides hydrogen and helium in the water, we're not made of much helium, but we have a lot of hydrogen in a lot of the water molecules in our body. The heaviest elements on the periodic table, like carbon, nitrogen, all the metals, as astronomers call them, anything heavier than hydrogen, only makes up 3/100ths of 1% of that cosmic energy budget. So that means you need basically, hundreds of volumes multiplied by meters cubed before you get one proton, one honest to goodness proton in the universe of the type of protonic matter that we're made up of. There are hydrogen atoms and nuclei throughout the universe and cosmic rays and so forth. The mass of the universe is incredibly tilted towards the abundance, the preponderance being dark energy. So that answers your question. Thank you very much. Let's go back to Twitter. Genesis describes, this is from Charlie Fry, Genesis describes existence before creation as tohu vavohu. Can it be describing what a black hole is? Charlie, thank you. I don't think so. I don't think it's describing anything physical. I think it is speaking in terms of a metaphoric license. The job the creator God undertook from Genesis 1:1 was to separate things. And the separation is delineated in many different attributes: light from darkness, earth from sky, water from matter, day from night, as they say, and then ultimately humans and animals, and then amongst the humans, males and females. It says God created them, male and female. So the tohu vavohu is actually the only example where it's combining something that are synonymous with each other: chaos and disorder, or everything was basically disordered and chaotic. Those are not, antonyms. Those are not divisions. It's almost as if there's an amalgam of everything. Now, if creation can be thought of as in astronomical terms, it would seem to me to be more akin to a white hole, producing matter, not absorbing or somehow constraining and causing matter to enter into an event horizon, sort of an event horizon in reverse. So I don't think so. Okay, a friend who has a very, very winsome name, Prometheus Warp X. Softball question for my fellow space-time traveler. Can a spacecraft equipped with sufficient warp drive technology successfully enter and leave a black hole's event horizon fully intact? The answer is, we don't know, but most likely not. That's a tough one. We have no idea. Some of these things are not even definitively interact. You can't, be sure that there even is such thing as a warp drive, and that could you enter even into a black hole? Classically, no, you could never enter and leave it. So Prometheus, thank you so much. Jamie Brown, Killer Clown 37. Define existence. Well, existence is an incredibly, obvious thing on one hand, but a very, very difficult thing. It's a lot like consciousness. When I talk to people about consciousness, they say, basically we can't know what your experience of consciousness is. And furthermore, we can't even understand what our experience of consciousness is, because it varies from time to time. And as guest on the show, Donald Hoffman has suggested, it's an evolutionary coping mechanism anyway. So even our consciousness is subjective, let alone your consciousness. And I feel the same way about existence. It's sort of like the Supreme Court in the 50s defined pornography. You know it when you see it. But the fact that things can come into and out of existence, that matter is not conserved in the universe, only energy, these are extremely interesting things to consider. Does a proton exist if it can fluctuate into and out of existence, or an electron? Andrew McKenzie asks, well, he just states something: self-organizing plasma and the seeming intelligence associated with it. I have no idea what that means. Thank you for asking. Adam, whose handle is UFO Curious, suggests I have alien scientist Jeremy Reese on the podcast. I have kind of pivoted away from direct, discussions of the alien kind of UFOs as actual extraterrestrial intelligence. I do have tentatively scheduled a conversation with Professor David Spergel, who is leading NASA's UAP study. I know that makes some of you incredibly uncomfortable that NASA is commissioned to study, but these are the most foremost scientists in the world, and according to astronomers, astrophysicists, biologists, and so forth. These are people with mathematics backgrounds, physics backgrounds. David Spergel is the president of the Simons Foundation. It doesn't work for the government. It's a totally independent panel. We'll see where that goes. I'll continue to have on people like Avi Loeb and others that are doing stuff similar to me, which is to try to acquire data and make the data and their interpretation available to the public. 1001 Nights asked, when will I have Peter Thiel on? Okay, so I've met Peter Thiel a couple times. 6 months ago, a year ago, he had a meeting, was attending a meeting that I was at in Europe, and it was quite delightful to talk to him and learn from him and so forth. And I asked him to come on the podcast, and he said he would. If you check the news, he's been having some controversies, as the British might say. So I certainly don't think it's on the horizon anytime soon, but he has promised to do it. We get along. I think he's very interesting. He's extremely interested in philosophy and physics, astronomy, and fundamental questions, big questions of existence. And I hope to have him on to discuss this when various things in his personal life get resolved. Okay, so I've got a couple more here. Someone asked, Des Oxen, what happened to your 80,000 Q&A? Was that a Patreon exclusive or something? No, it's on the channel. We look back, it's probably about 6 months ago. Suppose God exists, he goes on to ask. Suppose God exists outside of what we know as the universe. Would there be a current definitive size and shape of the universe for him? Would this even be a meaningful question? I think it's a question. It's hard to think about, how to answer it properly. In terms of God existing outside the universe, is it in terms of the composition of the universe can have incorporeal or non-physically embodied characteristics. In other words, the curvature of the universe, if it did exist. And actually, we don't know for sure it's exactly zero with no uncertainty. Everything in science has some uncertainty. So it could be the universe does have a curvature, and that curvature extends to, extremely large distance scales, such that the radius of curvature is many times the observable universe's extent. So right now, the observable universe is about 12 to 15 billion light years in terms of particles that could reach us with information today. But since the universe has been expanding since the last 13 billion, 800 million years, the universe has an even bigger sort of event horizon over which particles could even reach us traveling at the speed of light. And so the universe could be curved in those scales, and that curvature would contribute to its acceleration or its expansion. Curvature has an energy. Therefore, it is not altogether unmeaningless, to make up a word, as you say, and to ask this question. It is possible for incorporeal, they say, non-physically embodied entities, so not mass and energy or dark matter or dark energy, but actually curvature can manifest and alter the shape, size, and expansion of the universe. So that is a very interesting question. As far as existing outside of it, that's sort of beyond what I can really comprehend at this moment. Gaston Pierre asked the question, if after a double Stern-Gerlach experiment, regular interpretations of quantum mechanics don't offer conceivable visualization of quantized spin, shouldn't that motivate us to be more open to exotic theories like the transactional interpretation of quantum mechanics? I'm not familiar with the transactional interpretation of quantum mechanics. There are many interpretations of quantum mechanics. I find them, again, semi-unsatisfying. It's like eating food that somebody already ate. In the end, you could do, as I think Merman said, shut up and calculate. That's more kind of aligned with what I like to do as an experimentalist. Look at predictions that can be tested using technology rather than interpretation of things. I mean, they're already like much, much more basic things that we can't interpret properly. I'll give you an example. In electromagnetism, the electromagnetic field, E, or the B field, is not directly observable. Potential is not directly observable. And these are imaginary or actually complex numbers. So how can we interpret a complex number? We never measure it. And it's like the amplitude of the Schrodinger equation's wave function. We can't measure it directly. We can only measure it when it's collapsed or when it has been squared, and we integrate and calculate probabilities, probability densities. And those are things that have values because those are real numbers. The square, the complex conjugate times the complex number itself is a real number, and you can measure real numbers. We don't have voltmeters that have, complex numbers associated with them. So I kind of, get frustrated by talking about, well, what's the interpretation? The meaning is really what an interpretation of quantum mechanics is. Is the wave function real? Can we actually understand it? Those are not a satisfying type of questions to me, because we can't even answer, simpler questions like what is the interpretation of the electric field, which is something you could make, with just some static electricity, not like you need some warp drive as Prometheus Warp X would have us. Okay, Floor Horebecke from the Netherlands, I believe. Florian asks, okay, here goes. If the grand unified theory gut is one force that separates into three, is there a theory that does the same, including all fermions? Like if we look at the combined force as a line, that line has several peaks where certain particles have their lowest energy states. Weird question, ? It's not weird. I think you're saying it's hard for me to fully appreciate exactly what you're saying, but I think the question is, implying that the so-called grand unified theory does not include all the fermions. Well, there's many grand unified theories. It's not like saying the theory of special relativity. There's one of those. There are many grand unified theories. None of them have been accurately, demonstrated to make predictions that can be tested. There's some by friend of the show, Lee Smolin and Eric Weinstein, that do some types of unification. And, grand unification is the unification of the three strongest forces, not including gravity. Eric and others are trying to unify with gravity. String theory attempts to do that as well. But there's no theory of that. My joke is that we always put the toe, theory of everything, ahead of the gut, the grand unified theory. But many brilliant people, including past guest Sheldon Glashow, winner of the 1979 Nobel Prize, they tried to come up with this, grand unified theory eventually, and it just didn't work. So we don't actually have a grand unified theory that works the same way that the electroweak theory, the unification of electromagnetism, and the weak force has been manifested. We certainly don't have a theory of everything manifest. Okay, a couple more from Twitter, and then we'll move on. This is called person by the name of Tim Physics, theory of incomplete measurements, full handle. Why would space-time be continuous if no measurement of space or time is? Well, it's quite possible. We believe that space, for example, is at least either continuous or its discretization scale is much smaller than any ruler that we could ever possibly construct. So the same question would apply to that question. Why is space-time more granular than our current measurements of space and time are capable of resolving? Well, with better technology, we could measure smaller and smaller space-time intervals. So I don't really see that as too bad of a question or too stark of a paradox, but maybe I'm misinterpreting. Okay, a couple questions. This is a good one. Alexander Krups on Twitter again. What do you think about the Farview Lunar Telescope Array? Does it sound feasible to create a 20 by 20 kilometer antenna hedgehog structure on the moon in the next couple of decades? So I've actually been working with Google Labs, and they've constructed an artificial intelligence robot, which will answer things in my same voice. I actually have a voice synthesizer. So for the 150K episode, maybe I'll be able to actually, just have your questions, answer every single question you could possibly ask. So for now, though, I will look up the Farview Lunar Telescope because I don't know what it is. The Farview Lunar Telescope Array is a proposed project that aims to create a large telescope on the moon consisting of a large number of small telescopes. So it's an interferometric telescope like the Very Large Array that I've been to many times in New Mexico, or the ALMA Atacama Large Millimeter Array that I've also been to many times nearby my Simons Array and Simons Observatory projects. These telescopes are small. There's only 1 meter in diameter, according to my bard-like assistant. The hedgehog refers to telescope arrangement pattern. Be mounted on small spiky structures that resemble hedgehogs. Whether or not it's feasible to do that. Well, the first thing is depends on the technology. We're just now going back to the moon. We've been off the moon for decades. We're planning to go now in the next couple of years, first orbit the moon, then land on the moon, and potentially one of my past guests, Jessica Meir, could be the first woman to ever land on the moon. Hoping for her to come on. I interviewed her when she was on the space station in January of 2020, and that was a memorable kind of start to my podcasting career, to have a guest floating above my head at 290 kilometers above me. And that was really fun to get NASA involved in that, in all seriousness. So we don't know. So first she has to land there. Friends have to land there. It'll be a few decades before we can do large scale, terraforming on the moon, or lunar forming on the moon, or Selena forming on the moon. So I don't know how feasible it is. I don't know what their budget is. I love radio astronomy, and I think it's interesting. But we can do a lot of cool radio astronomy from the ground, and it's not at all clear, depending on wavelengths or so and so forth, that the moon would be a better place to do these types of measurements. So let's see. I've got more questions, similar people there. Okay, I'll wrap that up from Twitter. There's a bunch of questions from Floor and from other people. Some comments again. Thank you guys so much for your Twitter questions. Let's go back to YouTube. On the YouTube. So again, remember, you can always subscribe to my content on YouTube and ask questions in the community section. I love getting questions over there. Twitter, Dr. Brian Keating, Instagram, even Dr. Brian Keating. I just surpassed the 30,000 follower milestone on Twitter. I love you all. Let's go back and look at the questions from YouTube. Okay, Cool Cat asks, are you as concerned about the introduction of advanced AGI as Sam Harris, Nick Bostrom, or Elon Musk, maybe? So let's look at these guys. I've had one of the three of these on the podcast, and that's Nick Bostrom. I haven't had Sam Harris. Not entirely sure that I want to have him on. He is kind of he's a very brilliant guy, and he's very influential, obviously, and there's certainly a lot we could speak about. But there is sort of an attitude or an air of, that it is just so far beyond, kind of the selection criteria for him to converse with somebody seems to be so, astronomically out of proportion. He may be completely reluctant to engage. I mean, he's disengaged from Twitter, which I'm very much supportive of. I'm trying to limit my Twitter use. I think it can easily be addictive. I've got young kids at home. I don't want them on. They try to swipe my face when I'm talking to them, like I'm an iPad. So I salute that. There is, I think, very clearly, the machinations back and forth about Trump and how, Hunter Biden's laptop could have had, demonstrated that, he's a murderer or something. It was just incredible. And that he just can't walk back this claim that he has. And I listened to interviews with him with Scott Galloway, who's another difficult character to talk about because, he's also kind of, said he would come on the podcast, but did not, and kind of wasted a lot of my time, trying to set up a podcast and pitching ideas for when he does come on in, and then he just kind of blew it off and would still go on much, a smaller, less intelligent audience podcast than mine, including Sam Harris's. I'm not saying Sam Harris's audience is less intelligent. I'm sure many of you are subscribers to Sam, as I am as well. But I listened to a podcast with them in 2020 in the middle of the election season and just talking about how Trump, literally could cause the immolation of the whole planet if he were reelected. And some of the concepts that they were talking about in that podcast, Galloway who has a podcast that I listen to, as I say, and Sam Harris, it involved, these insane kind of claims, or at least they sounded insane to people in 2020, that because of Trump, he could cause, a war to break out in Central Europe between, that Trump would be the reason that Putin could use nuclear missiles, and that Trump could, cause fan the flames of racial, hatred and anti-Semitism, and that Trump could be responsible for a breakdown in relations with China, and that those would pose an existential risk for this planet. And it's just insane because all those things have come true, and Trump hasn't been in office. And even after he was, kicked out of office, and you could say what you like about him, I'm not like a huge fan, I was never like a huge supporter of his. But if you look at it through an objective lens, which Sam is, he's supposed to be this guy who makes sense, literally, that's the name of this podcast, for him not to see this huge lacuna in his understanding and prediction, and not to issue a mea culpa about it, that, I was wrong, Trump is not Orange Hitler. He did not cause the devastation, and to say that, well, he didn't do it during his first 4 years, and that shouldn't give any Bayesian credence to the notion that he might also not cause it in a second term. But no. According to Sam Harris and Scott Galloway, Trump would be responsible for wars in Europe and increasing hostility with Iran and with China. It's just a mesmerizing conversation to look back on with the benefit of hindsight, and to hear them speculating about the hatred and that the need that Joe Biden will cause the community to be radically, not polarized the way Trump. It's just astounding. The guy has no self-awareness for this one. He may be brilliant in a variety of different capacities, and I do quote him from time to time, always with attribution. That's a must. So that's my little rant about Sam Harris and Scott Galloway. These people seem to be obsessed with Trump, and I find it leads to a diminution of their IQ by at least a handful of points. Anyway, Sam Harris has said that he thinks artificial general intelligence could easily cause the extinction of the human race, the extinction of the human race. He argues that AGI could become so vastly intelligent that it would surpass human intelligence and creativity, and it could decide that humans are a threat or not worth keeping around. So he's extremely negative, cool cap. Bostrom, on the other hand, has been on the show, unlike Galloway or Harris or Musk. Again, the reason I want these people on is not so that I can, kind of rehash and score up brownie points and get more viewers on some episode. I found that it doesn't really work. In the past, I've had on some huge guests and that led to huge views. I've had on some huge guests that led to no views. I've had some small guests that led to huge views and some small guests, in terms of followings. So it's completely random. So the reason that I want to guest on the show is because I believe I have something to offer them, not only that they have something to offer me, because a lot of what these people have said is available elsewhere in terms of what they're interested in. What would be new is their interaction with me. And hopefully by the 100,000+ people that tune in, I'm the most consistent guest on the show. And so hopefully you guys appreciate the way that I do approach these things as an experimental scientist. I'm not a theoretical physicist, with kind of my head in the sky, trying to, think of different ways that I could possibly be right. No, I'm trying to actually prove those theorists wrong. That's my job, is more to prove theorists wrong by building telescopes that acquire data that subject theories to the test, like an assayer, like what Galileo wrote about. An assayer is somebody who has, you come to him with a piece of what you think is gold, what you hope is gold, and the assayer takes that piece of gold and takes another completely worthless rock, some other thing called a touchstone, takes the gold and rubs the gold on the touchstone, and the way it rubs off can either tell you that that piece of gold is truly gold or if it's fool's gold. So what an experimentalist should do is do the same thing. The theorists come to us, I've got this new piece of gold, the universe began with inflation. No, I go out, I take it, rub it against the touchstone of observational cosmology, and I reveal it to be dust or something not exactly what it was purported to do. So that's why I want to have people like Nick Vosterman, who I did have on, and we talked about his theory of superintelligence, or Elon Musk, who I haven't had on. But Musk is a character in many ways. First of all, I would love to actually dive deep into the psychology of him as a as a physicist, that might sound strange, but he's also a physicist, and he has lots of things to talk about when it comes to philosophy and psychology. He's trained as a physicist, studied physics at UPenn and in Canada. So he's never been on with a physicist. I mean, he tends to go on with people like Lex Friedman and Joe Rogan and so forth, and that's great, and that's his right. And he has talked about aliens and so forth, but there are concrete questions to ask him that nobody ever seems to do, which have to do with the practicality and the actual legitimacy of Mars as a destination versus other tools and prospects for improving life on Earth. And actually, it seems as if it's just like imperative to become interplanetary, but no one ever asks him why. And then, to the extent that he does talk about things like AGI, as the question was asked from Cool Cat, is it a risk? He says it's a risk greater than nuclear weapons. He says that funding of artificial intelligence is done to ensure that humanity stays on the right path. He's called for a 6-month delay in artificial intelligence development, at least in the West, which is being like, okay, Microsoft, Bing, Bard, beep and bop and boop, shut down your research. And I'm sure that China and North Korea and, and Belarus and I'm sure all these places are just going to stop and pause as we ponder whether or not artificial intelligence should go beyond the path that it's going. I think it's a fantasy. I think he is acquiring, GPUs. He's smart. He's getting processing power. The one thing that he really needs are energy sources. He's looked at energy, Solar City and so forth. He loves solar energy. That's great. Obviously, very deeply invested with SpaceX and launch vehicles. But I see very little near-term use case for going to Mars. He asks it'll be an interesting tourist place, destination to go. The moon is much more practical in every sense of the word. You could have autonomous vehicles that are piloting. You're not going to have like people with joysticks, cruising around the moon, landing on Olympus Mons. You're going to have robots doing it. And those robots will be commanded by some onboard AGI and then some AGI that's on Earth on these vast NVIDIA, superclusters that, take up the size of the Gigafactory. So that's impractical. That's a 15-minute, round trip, on the best case scenario to steer the ship away. Oh, we just got new data. We analyzed the landing site. It's going to be a sandstorm, like past guest on the show Andy Weir depicts in The Martian. Whereas on the moon, it's a second. It's 1 second light travel time. The moon is, visible basically all the time. Mars is incredibly difficult for very many months of the year to actually communicate with. No one ever asks him why Mars is such an imperative, or really presses him, just keep going. Okay, so what do you need? What's going to happen to the biology of the system, of the human being up there? He says he wants to die on Mars. Does he want to die on impact, like just getting there? Does he want to live for decades there? Also, as a father, he's got 10 kids. They all going to come with him? Or his different mothers of those kids, from what's her name, Grimes to the other ones. Is he going to pack up little X in a baby astronaut suit? Or if he has more kids, which the probability is not insignificant that Elon's going to have even more kids, past performance is somehow indicative of future performance. So anyway, I'm not as nervous about AGI. I use it. It's incredible. I was just, I tweeted at Lex, my buddy Lex, and you can see my interview with him on YouTube, which is, I think, is one of the top 30 of all of his podcasts in terms of views, which is really heartwarming to me. And we've talked about doing a part 2. And I think when I have something that Lex will appreciate, we'll do a part 2. Some of you, like Anthony Munoz, is suggesting I bring Lex on the podcast. He did say he would come on the podcast a year ago when I was on his podcast down in Austin. We haven't made it happen. He's been on Andrew Huberman's podcast a couple times. Andrew's a friend on the internet, so to speak. We follow each other on Twitter. We talk and DM each other. I've asked him to come on. Again, not to say, like, what makes a good morning routine, Andrew? Like, let's talk about that. No, I want to talk about the physics of chemical reactions in the retina. I want to talk about what would be the impact on if there is an alien civilization that we encounter. Would they have day-night cycles, circadian rhythms? Would they have starlight-adapted behavior? How should astronomers best optimize for visual acuity in optical, and, not every astronomer is, using the Keck telescope. In fact, most astronomers are not using the Keck telescope or the Hubble or the Webb, and they're using their eyes and they're looking at things. And they're looking for tiny differences in visual fields. And we only have a tight visual fovea, area of attention we can pay attention to. Diurnal cycles, every single thing that we know in the universe spins. So that means another planet will spin. And if that spin is not co-aligned, it will, with its orbital tangent vector or anti-aligned, it will then cause a precession, which will lead to seasonal behavior on the exoplanet. Could that be done? And Arch Astrology asks, has anyone in biology or chronobiology ever done a comparative analysis between the 20 amino acids and the 20 days of the Mayan calendar by sequence and function? Absolutely not. I have no idea what that means. Now we're way out of the picture here. But chronobiology is something that Andrew Huberman, who is one of the guests that Lex has had on, and Lex has been on his show, it's all a big way of saying I'm hoping to actually sit down and talk to these people, including Elon, as an experimental physicist. And I think that's the reason why so many people are interested in my video with Lex or with Jordan Peterson. They've never heard an experimental. They've heard Michio Kaku go on Lex and talk about, the mind of God traveling as an AI avatar, at the speed of light, uploaded to the universal cloud computer. All this, quite frankly, nonsensical sounding things. And I like Michio. I've spent a lot of time with him in person in the last couple of years. Been on his podcast, he's been on mine. But there's a lot of hoopla. There's a lot of hype. There's enough hype in science as it is. It's one of my rants is that we have this academia media hype cycle where, some professor is working in her lab and she discovers something, and then she immediately thinks, it would be nice to get tenure, and it would be nice for my graduate student to get a postdoc, and it would be nice if I got, an NSF grant or an NIH grant before I turn 50, which is almost the average age for an NIH grant at 41 for your first NIH grant. So, there's some pressure that, maybe I should promote this research and I'll just stick to my field. Maybe I'll claim that there is a discovery of the inflationary origin of the universe. And maybe that'll be good for me to get tenure, become a full professor, or get a job offer from an Ivy League school and stop working at a public. I'm just making all this up, but I want to make it real. I'm no better than anybody else, but I'm also no worse. And we get this temptation for all sorts of accolades, honors, awards, prizes, funding, research attention, sabbatical credits, and committees assignments, deanships, provost. It's a huge game. Academia is a game, and you have to play it smart. So actually, I'm on LinkedIn lately. I used to think LinkedIn was like, you're combining, the desperation for friends of Facebook with the desperation for a job, that is LinkedIn. But I've actually come around. I've seen it. It's a very it's a great place. There's some people out there, I don't prefer to associate with. Apparently, there's a lot of vaccine denial, and there's a lot of climate change denial and whatever. What I've seen of it is really phenomenal. I get to talk to 15,000 graduate students, undergraduates, postdocs, and that's my key audience. I always say, the reason I give away meteorites to you, if you have a .edu email address, is because I want to play a role in your education. I want to be an informal mentor or educator for you. I don't have time to answer all your emails and so forth, but hopefully the content that I put out and the people I connect you to, it's better than 100 Harvards. I've been to these places. I have Ivy League degrees. I've been at Caltech. I know that the community of people that I've put together with your help, because you guys give me this massive quality and quantity that I can throw in front of a publicist and say, look, do you want to talk to the 120,000 most brilliant young minds in the world, and older minds, males and females, every continent, including Antarctica? And they'll say, hell yeah, because they're not stupid. They want to get attention. Books are never going to stop. It's like the mail, but the mail never stops and your email never stops. You're getting a Slack message right now. You better answer it. But what we can do is take advantage of that. We want to have more and more conversations with the brightest minds in the universe to make a free university. You can attend it in your pajamas, taught by the best intellects in the world, not just me. I think I'm okay, but you're going to learn from the greatest intellects in the world. And the project's going to expand because we're going to bring in people like Galileo, like Feynman, like Einstein. I'm in the process now of working with somebody that I met on LinkedIn, now going back to LinkedIn, And that person and I are going to work on starting by the acquisition that I have of the 150,000 word dialogue on two world systems by Galileo. So imagine putting Galileo into a chatbot and putting that chatbot into the world so that you can be taught by Galileo. There's nothing that you could ask me that was known at the time. Okay, so you can't ask Galileo that, what are the most novel ways to sequence DNA, but you could ask him anything about mechanics, about philosophy, about even things like, the existence of planets outside of the Earth with life on them. And you can do that because he's got these words digitized. We can put them into a chatbot, and then we can actually have his voice. We can do that in his voice, and we can even have a visual avatar of him. And I'm hoping to make that basically free to all of them. So I'm excited about AI, AGI. I see it right now as a competition between people that know how to use it, people that are terrified and will never use it, and then the people that are hyping it up so much. Like literally every day, I find about 10 new, just like incredible, mind-blowing things I can do with it, thanks to people on Twitter, on LinkedIn. Should we go again? And it's not, you can imagine that I won't have to set foot in the studio ever again. I'll just take my face, I'll write a script with the help of, some AI stuff that's interesting about my research maybe, and then I'll have a digital voice. I'm not going to do that. I don't plan to do that because I think you guys crave authenticity, as do I. I don't want to listen to some, like deep fake of Brian Keating. It would be kind of cool to get out of, when like, you ever have your kid just tell you a story, just don't know when it's going to end, and you're praying, they're not going to be ending that, kind of long story that's just really involved about Minecraft. And then they're not just going to end with like, well, what do you think I should do? I was thinking about like, Chat GPT. So I'm really excited about that and how to use it. It's overwhelming how much inbound information there is about it. And it's very difficult to kind of separate the wheat from the chaff. Okay, Cool Cat, I guess, again, asked, Rogan would be a good guest. Yes, I agree. Again, I don't want to go on Joe Rogan for my benefit. Like somebody asked me, well, like now you've been on Lex Friedman, Ben Shapiro multiple times, Jordan Peterson, who else is left? Joe Rogan. You need to go on Joe Rogan. And somebody actually asked that, and I didn't put in this kind of one page of questions, like really talking about why I should go on Rogan and stuff like that. It's flattering. Again, he's had on I won't say that. He's had on like 5 or 6 theoretical physicists or mathematicians. Eric Weinstein doesn't call himself a physicist for some reason. But he'll call himself a mathematician. But he talks about physics all the time, let's be honest. Michio Kaku, Brian Greene, Brian Cox, Brian Yazanana is this guy. Michio Kaku multiple times. And Sean Carroll, Lawrence Krauss. These are all have one thing in common, all theoretical physicists. Nothing wrong with them. Some of my best friends are theoretical physicists. But as the saying goes, a theoretical physicist only has to be right once in their life to have a legendary career. And some people have legendary careers and have never made a prediction that could be tested. Edwin, just to take a side detour of someone who won't come on the podcast, and I don't even know if I'd have him on the podcast, quite frankly, because he has such abhorrent views about Israel. He's so what's called anti-Zionist that he really almost seems like he doesn't believe that Israel has a right to exist, let alone as a Jewish homeland, and he seems to only have approbation for it. And I find that just almost impossible to take. It just as if like somebody came on the podcast and was like, I hate Italy. Italy should not exist. Italy should be given over to, some country that historically has tried to destroy Italy. And there should be no two-state solution, or if there is, it should be dominated by the anti-Italians. I don't want to talk to such a person like that. Israel has plenty of flaws. One of the great things about it, though, is that they have open and honest conversations. There are Arabs in the parliament, in the Knesset, in the military. You don't find that in countries. It's not like Germany in the 1930s had a lot of Jews in the military or in the government. Or South Africa, they had a lot of blacks in their name of her Politburo or whatever it was called, or the Soviet Union. They didn't have a lot of their enemies. Those are true apartheid states, and yes, you can agree. And actually, the most people that are most vehemently anti-Israel are Jews, and Edwin's a Jew, of course. But that doesn't give you any special right he doesn't have special knowledge that you as a Christian might not have. So I would find it very difficult to talk to him. But let me just put that aside. He won the Fields Medal. And so it's incredible that he did that as a physicist. It's kind of crazy that he's able to do it. A lot of what he did involved, things related to Chern-Simons and topological states of matter and field theory, unified field theory. But none of that's had any connection to technology, to observations. It would be true if string theory could somehow be tested, and maybe that's just a matter of the future. But for someone like Joe Rogan to speak only to theorists and really listen to them as they wax rhapsodically about, as I said, Michio Kaku's appearance on there, it's a little difficult to listen to. Even, Roger Penrose, again, on Joe Rogan, when he starts talking from an extremely esoteric way of describing the base layer of physical reality. Eric has this challenge too. Many of you respond to the videos like, I have no idea what he said. It's word salad. He can only take something that's really complex and make it more complex. Eric is actually, brilliant as surmised, but in terms of explaining base layer things, an experimentalist has to understand theory, at least at the level of being able to design an experiment to test that theory. And again, our job is not to prove Eric right or Eddie Gittin right, it's to prove them wrong and prove everybody wrong except for one person who may be one of you out there listening, you with your .edu email addresses. I think that's really cool. Another guest that I had on is being mentioned by Michael Smith, Freeman Dyson. He was my first guest. The first real guest of this podcast was Freeman Dyson, and he sadly died at the very beginning of COVID in March of 2020. So I got just a tremendous amount out of him intellectually, and just his spirit is just so warm, so loving, such a delightful, impish, person. I miss him terribly, and I really feel honored that he was my first guest, and that can never be taken away from me. April Van Ryan Rin, she's asking, Elon, why did you sabotage your financial security by buying Twitter? So maybe it's a question for me to ask Elon. I think I could do that, as I say, in a different way. I think I ask him, when we talk about what is the vision of a Twitter, and I'd run different scenarios by him that have a basis in physical reality. In other words, how do you envision this? The payment of Twitter is predicated almost entirely on the financial success of Tesla and SpaceX. And SpaceX is not a publicly traded company, but Tesla is. It's kind of a proxy for SpaceX. So, how do these two things intersect with one another? How does Twitter, put your dreams as you professed of going to Mars and dying on Mars, does this not impact that? I mean, could you use another $44 billion? And yes, he obviously committed to free speech. People like Scott Galloway, just can't stand him. And they expressed their derision of him and his mismanagement of Twitter on Twitter. And he's obviously addicted to Twitter, as he admits. And I always, like to joke when people like that and say, you should eventually charge rent, Scott, because he's just like in your brain 24/7. Scott's got 2 podcasts. I listened to both of them, one with Kara Swisher. Same thing, just nonstop. Why Elon is the worst person in the world, why he, contributed to, gays being targeted and his rhetoric is physically dangerous. It's just really incredible. And there is no connection between buying Twitter and reaching Mars. I think would be naive. So I would like to talk about that. Obviously talk about ways that Twitter could be used if it became part of the interplanetary operating system. Then I could see ways to do that. That it would need massive upgrades. Right now, I cannot post this video on Twitter and so-called monetize it. You could become a subscriber to me on Twitter, and I will post stuff, and I subscribe to Elon and Lex and a few others on Twitter. We pay some number of dollars per month. It's kind of mind-numbingly boring for me to do that, to manage. I mean, I very much appreciate everybody on Patreon who supports me with a tremendous amount of money on Patreon and on YouTube via the membership vector. I get paid a decent amount of money from it, probably about $1,000 a month from all my Patreon supporters, my Twitter supporters, my YouTube supporters, and people that send super thanks. And so, and I never take that for granted. That is incredibly generous and lovely. I don't have the time to produce like extra special content. I'm too busy with my OnlyFans. Okay, guys, I cannot take the time away from OnlyFans to dedicate. Now, it's hard enough making content as it is. I've got 2 pretty serious other side hustles, an audio podcast, and I also am a professor. And, trying to reconcile all those together is quite difficult to then hand tailor content to each of us. So I will on occasion express my gratitude in these kinds of conversations, but also I do send out special, subscriber or Patreon or YouTube member only gifts. Like I gave away copies of audiobooks. I'm going to give away physical books as well, and digital books, Kindle books of some of my favorite books. Stay tuned for that. I'm doing that. I also send meteorites. I've sent out over 2,000 meteorites to people around the world. They've listened to my podcast on other people's podcasts and signed up for my mailing list at blindkeating.com/list. Again, you have a .edu email, you automatically get one of these. At least if you're in the U.S., it's kind of hard to send stuff out over the international mail. But speaking of international, I was recently on a channel run by a guy who calls himself Canadian Prepper. And it's a fun channel. I've been watching this channel for 8-9 years now. He's grown from 0 subs to over 1 million. And he runs a whole preparedness channel where he talks about survivalism and how to make strong kids and how to light a fire in the woods and how to kill a bear with your bare hands. He's just an incredible guy, but he also goes and does a deep dive almost every night about the politics of what he calls the shizzy hitting the fizzy, SHTF or Teotihuacan, the end of the world as we know it, and how to prepare for it, because a prepared mindset is one that wants to live in the future. And maybe I'll describe it, because what else do I have to do right now? I'm just enjoying a cozy fire. Maybe I'm gonna get this. It's very cold in San Diego, so I made a fire here at the house at the Mount Reed Laboratory, the recording studio. Let me pause. I'll be right back. I'm gonna light the fire and make it go up. Big time fire go, and we're back. The fire is roaring. Can you feel it? Who thought in San Diego in May, on May the 4th, be with you, but I need a roaring fire to keep myself warm. But it helps me feel cozy. That cheers me up. As does this cup, courtesy of my Army brother Chad, serving his country, protecting us at land and sea and in space. Thank you, my brother. Where were we? Talking about my friend, Canadian Preparedness. So I got in touch with him through a series of, well, actually just one very snarky comment on one of his videos where he was talking about this so-called Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, which is an organization that used to be incredibly important and revered and listened to even. Einstein was a member, I believe, as was Oppenheimer. That was back in its glory days in the Cold War, when its mission was to prevent atomic holocaust from being visited on Earth. Especially during the Trump administration, they went deranged as well. And at one point, I believe their job is to set the doomsday clock. So they set the doomsday clock to a very, very close amount of time, very, very minimal amount of time left. And you look this up. They never move it backwards. I don't think they've ever moved it from, it's gone from 20 minutes to midnight. Now it's 30 seconds. January 24th of this year, they released that the doomsday clock had been moved to 90 seconds to midnight. Now, they had done many, many times. Back in 2017, this is 5 days after the Trump inauguration. So that time they moved it from 3 minutes to destruction to a mere 2.5 minutes to destruction. In other words, just him getting inaugurated was the reason. The ascent of Donald Trump. Never before has the bulletin decided to advance the clock largely because of the statements of a single person. Mr. Trump's statements and actions have been unsettling. I'm sure that, if Hillary had been elected or, Biden forever, they would have also moved it because the events that played out actually at the same time. Now, this has to go to my friend and upcoming guest. Maybe by the time you see this, he'll already have been a guest. He's been a guest in the past, Lawrence Krauss of Arizona State University. At least he was back then. He was the theoretical physicist, and he was the chair of the board of atomic science, Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. And at the time, he said that they wanted to send a cautionary message 6 days into an administration that the group says shows a growing disregard for scientific expertise. So it's incredibly political. And maybe one of my many flaws is that I never push back on the crazy kind of out of complete left field stuff that Lawrence says. We'll be doing an event together live in San Diego later this year, I hope. stay tuned for that. You'll find out more if you join my newsletter at briankeating.com/list. Some of my first live events for the podcast, I'll be doing at least 2 of them in San Diego. I'll stay tuned for those. Anyway, Lawrence, is kind of radically anti-Trump. And yet he's found himself in some situations not unlike Trump. Accusations of sexual harassment that he claims are baseless, and has put out statements about that. Trump famously claiming to grab, women in the where because they like it when you're famous. Reprehensible things that, I wouldn't say, certainly, but to say that because of someone like that the world is essentially as close as ever to nuclear holocaust. And then I believe they moved it again during Trump after, that was 6 days after he was elected. So all these things are publicity stunts in many ways. Then I think they moved it to, so then they moved it again in the year 2020. Again, this is, the year of COVID, right? They moved it not because of COVID and doomsday that could result, but because of Trump's increasingly, irrational behavior. They moved it to 100 seconds. So they went, so Trump came into office 2017. They moved it 2018 at 2 minutes. They moved it to 2.5 minutes from 3 minutes because he was inaugurated. Then in 2018, for reasons they don't really respond, they moved it 30 seconds ahead. Then they did it again in 2019, and then they moved it from 120 seconds to 120 seconds. It's just a silly, pointless thing that nobody really thinks about because it's become so politicized. So what does this have to do with Canadian preparedness? Well, Canadian Prepper, is kind of using that information to bolster the case that, we're on a hair trigger, and they moved it even closer to midnight, last couple of months ago. And that was because of the war in the Ukraine, which they completely forgot to mention was caused during the Biden administration. And many, many people have criticized Biden for his role, either encouraging it. Just recently, there was a drone attack, but the Russians said it was caused and participation and agreement by the United States government. They're sending tremendous amounts of, first they're not going to send anything, then they're going to send money, now they're going to send missiles, then they're going to send tanks, now they're going to send F-16s, then they're never going to send people, now there's people in Belarus. It's just incredible how much more it's amplified. That one conflict, which is the most serious conflict in my lifetime, since the BAS was probably, founded the bulletin to actually, bring us close to nuclear holocaust. And Trump's nowhere to be found, right? So anyway, like him or hate him. My friend Nate, Canadian Preparedness, he put this video out, features this bulletin seriously. And I just commented in the comment section, no serious scientist listens to the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists anymore. It's completely politicized, and they're suffering from Trump derangement syndrome. Like many in academia, by the way. I remember when I came into my office to meet for lunch with a colleague in the literature department on November, 10th of 2016, the day after he got elected, and I had coffee with her, and she was complaining that some of her colleagues had betrayed, the human race, and certainly, she thought that the vote was cast in a reprehensible fashion. And I said, wait a second, to my colleague, whose name I won't reveal, but I said, you're kidding me, like somebody in the literature department voted for, which is the most left-wing, one of the most left-wing departments on our campus, and I've got many friends over there. And she said, I said, one of your colleagues voted for Trump? She said, oh, God, no, they voted for Bernie. They threw their vote away. They should have voted for Hillary. I was like, well, I don't think that really made a difference in California. Anyway, he posted this thing. I kind of snarked at him. Then he wrote me an email and found my email address and was like, I don't know if you're being a jerk or not, but you're condescending comment. But, when a real YouTube channel like mine, his, with 1 million subscribers that I've watched since, 2014 or whatever, when we present things to the public, it has to be done in a way that has legitimate sources that could be at least fact-checked or confirmed by the general public, and it can't be just for physicists like you. That said, I checked out your channel, and you've had incredible guests, and you do incredible videos. I'd love to have you on my show to talk about threats of and what an alternative to that Bulletin of the Atomic Scientist that's not political, which I think would be incredibly valuable, by the way. Anyway, we ended up having a 2-hour conversation earlier this week, and that should air pretty soon. If it hasn't already, I'll put a link to it on my community tab. and add his channel to my channel list of other channels. And you should find it, because I do believe that people should be prepared. And we talked about a great deal of things. He's very philosophically inclined, and he has children like me, and we talked about how to raise them and have a preparedness mindset to be resilient in the face of potential for at least the world looking very different in the next 10 years than it has in the last 10 years. I think there's no doubt about it. And he's one of the best in the business at kind of bringing news and attention to your mind. And he pushes back on people. It wasn't just this, kind of softball interview the way that, some people have accused me of doing, or maybe, when I was at Lex, that, nobody pushed back on Brian or whoever. So I learned a lot from the interview. I think he will too. Okay, let's get back to the roster of questions. I got a few more minutes before I have my own office hours. So here's a big one. Rogan is not a scientist, art astrology. Correct, he's not a scientist. But talking to an experimental physicist would be great for him to learn about the practicalities of what real physics is meant to do, which is not to think and talk about, these esoteric theories of wormholes and black holes and, warp drives and everything. Those are fun to think about, but it's more fun to live in reality, to describe what we know and what we know we don't know, and prepare for those kinds of eventualities, because we're only going to live for a few more years, any of us. I don't think there's any prospect for us living beyond the lifespan of a tortoise. So let's make the most of it. And to my mind, it's to, kind of falsify and invalidate as many theories and so forth as we can in the future. And so, yes, we're going on Rogan's show. I think would be hopefully good for him. And I don't mean that sound arrogant. I just think to give him a different perspective. He's had 10 different people from a pure theoretical bed, no one from an experimental bed, then to talk about the possibilities of detecting, aliens, to the threats of artificial intelligence, to, from an experimentalist point of view, where these things are resource constrained. It's not like ChatGPT is going to plug into my fireplace and, turn it into a steam gas generator and power itself. So what are the physical limitations? What are the astronomical considerations? And to, confront somebody who is not just going to pitch my own book. I don't have to sell my books. I've got a lavish lifestyle because of that. No. But what I do feel is it's important to bring a perspective of the kind of brass tacks and reality to some of these shows. And I try to do that when I'm a guest on other people's shows as well. And people seem to like it. The Jordan Peterson episode, some people are saying it's the best episode that he's done. And certainly the best episode I've ever done. So I'm really gratified to hear those kinds of comments. Next, get Stephen Wolfram on the show. I've had him on the show twice. Overturned is the thank you. I'll have him back again. He didn't, kind of really seem to enjoy the conversation with Eric Weinstein. So I think I would do another solo episode with him. Again, I've done 2 episodes with him. He's got some really interesting takes on artificial intelligence. And he's interesting because he emails me all the time. Stephen, lose my email, baby. No, I love hearing from him. He sends in his emails, and it's like, hi, Brian, I'd love to talk to you. And, or you might be interested in this. He doesn't say, I'd love to talk to you. I'm sure you'd be interested in this. It might even make me, want to come back on the show again soon, wink, wink. And then I'm like, great, Stephen, I read the article, from your blog. I saw your interview on my friend Kurt Jevhungel's episode. Shout out to Kurt. Love you, man. You did such phenomenal work. He's really an unsung hero of this game, and I wouldn't have the number of subscribers and fans that I have without him. So thank you, Kurt. But anyway, so Stephen will write me, and then I'll write him back. House tomorrow night, crickets. So Stephen, if you're out there, come back on the pod. Don't keep, making me beg you to come back. Okay. The Busted Boat asks an incredible question. What is the biggest threat to humanity that is not nuclear war, global warming, or artificial intelligence? Thank you so much. So I hear a lot about these old. So there are many different things that aren't related at all to these things, global warming, et cetera. A global extinction events. These are things that, just kind of blithely, kind of whistle past the graveyard about. But there are many of them, and I think, just a handful I can name in real time: asteroids, supervolcanoes, another pandemic, but even the pandemic of kind of the worst kind, in my mind, which I'll get to at the end, is a pandemic of lack of faith, a confidence pandemic. And I'll describe what I mean in a bit. So what could an asteroid do? Asteroids could wipe out tons of life forms on Earth, as it did 60 million years ago with the dinosaurs. But that then set the stage for small mammals, rats, rodents, other of my colleagues. Just kidding, guys, just kidding. No rats and apes. Rats desert the ship. You guys don't. No, I'm just kidding. So when I think about asteroids, I always have to point out I give away fragments of an asteroid. That's what a meteorite is. If you have a .edu email address, briankeating.com. Globally, though, what could happen? It would induce what we think is a sort of a global winter, like a nuclear winter, but caused by artificial means, or natural means, not by man-made nuclear detonation of a sort that Carl Sagan described as nuclear winter. There's probability every year of this happening. We track asteroids bigger than a certain size that are in deep space orbits. We luckily have this giant vacuum cleaner that we put out in space during the design phase of the solar system called Jupiter that sucks up a lot of stuff. And if that doesn't get you, the moon has its face, demonstrates how many near misses we've had. And almost any of the craters you can see through a moderately sized telescope would have done severe damage to the Earth, and if not extinction level itself, although a couple of them, Copernicus crater among them, would be pretty devastating. The impactors are just incredible, especially at the angles that they would have come in at. Those are things I worry a lot about. I know the guest I'll never have on now since this podcast, Sam Harris, has talked a lot about bioterrorism, and that would involve, biological agents like viruses and whatnot. I'm not a biologist. That could cause, just really, imagine if the case fatality rate, imagine if it was what it was, but instead of killing the elderly predominantly, and that's a tragedy, but it killed children. Imagine that for the previous virus that arrives with Blovid. That would be a horrible thing. I think we would have had a very different reaction to it. And not to diminish the deaths of the elderly, the 1 million+ people that died in the U.S. By the way, I do remember, again, kind of this hysteria about how, when the virus in its initial phases in 2020 during the election, the New York Times would print on its front page, all 100,000 Americans that were considered to die of COVID. And I haven't seen an article about that lately, with the remaining 990,000 names that have died since then. Why is that? And I think that will dovetail with the final bullet point of what I'm worried about. Could we have runaway nanotechnological scenarios that either through a coupling, although this is kind of forbidden in the question itself, which said don't consider AI, but nevertheless, if there was some kind of melding of nanotechnology where you could connect to the physical world from the digital world of AI, where it has some imperative to, there's the paperclip, kind of parable of what happens. I won't go through that. But if there were, kind of a sentience that could connect to the physical world. Now, my friends have a Tesla. And as Michael Shermer has pointed out, when he drives his Tesla, it has a lot of AI in it. In fact, Tesla's the most sophisticated, consumer-grade AI. Like, you can't buy a Chat GPT. You can run on your computer. You can do whatever. Somehow house, tens of trillions of NVIDIA GPUs somewhere. You don't have that GPU set up in your computer. You have to pay for access to it. Nevertheless, the Tesla has these dedicated chips, these engines that power the AI on board. And yet, as Mike points out, never does my, Tesla, according to him, never does his Tesla, decide, well, it's actually faster to get to Starbucks if I just, drive down the street, and then plot out all these pedestrians to get to Starbucks and get my latte. So there is already like a connection between a physical system, an embodiment of locomotion and animation, the physical wheels of the car driving the motor. Somehow, even with our primitive, what I think they call, generation 3 or whatever, generation 4, we're not even at what is accepted by everybody. And Tesla calls what they have full self-driving, it's beta, whatever, but they don't consider it like level 5, or I forget what it is. One of you guys would correct me. So the point being, even a level 3 or whatever it is now, these AIs are, it's kind of like giving your toddler a machine gun. They're not at the level of sophistication. Now, maybe this machine gun is not like going to do the damage in the toddler's hands as it would be Putin's hands, or whoever your favorite villain is, Zelensky. I don't know. Everybody hates it. So the point is, I'm not as worried about that. But when you do meld together the operating system with the physical embodiment, then things could get interesting, but it could get very good. It could be that we, imagine AI that's actively participating in weather, in controlling the weather, which can be done and is done in the Middle East, for example. They seed clouds to produce rain, and a lot of the Gulf states wouldn't exist in the, very opulent fashion that they do without this kind of technology. Now imagine you have all these solar panels and then you build them here in California and it's freezing in May. It's snowing not too far from here, and they're covered up with snow. And well, would it be great if you had, some way to control the weather based on forecasts, based on some highly complexified modeling that only, AI could maybe use to forecast, and then connecting it to the panels and the grid itself. That could be really good. And it could lead to an optimal, kind of behavior. So the question that asked, not to consider climate change. Sorry. Well, I do want to have on, I've tried to have on, people that, like Lawrence Krauss and David Pogue and others that, are more on the, very, very concerned, also on the left, politically speaking. It'd be interesting to have people, that have an alternative viewpoint. I don't know this guy, Bjorn Lomborg or whoever. He's not really a scientist. But Steve Koonin at NYU is, and I've tried to get him on very haphazardly. I'll try to get him on again. He was a provost at Caltech when I was a postdoc there. He's a brilliant guy. He's written a book, it's where much, much more sanguine about humanity's prospects. Cool Cat says to Michael, not sure Freeman Dyson will do interviews. That's true. He can no longer do it, although with some AI avatars cruising through the space at the speed of light, according to Michio Kaku, maybe it'll be possible. Will I have an expert? Someone asks. His name is someone or her name. Will you have an expert in the field of AI alignment? I'm not hearing good things about the prospect of AI alignment compared to advancements in the capabilities of AI. So AI alignment, I'm going to assume, for a lack of any real knowledge about it, has to do with, kind of the implications of AI to do things and whether or not it has a vectorially aligned pattern with what humanity and the flourishing of humanity would have. So AI alignment experts are those people, again, I'm kind of assuming, making this up, we're wondering whether or not these people consider the moral or maybe the ethical, philosophical, theological embodiments. One thing I've thought about as someone who's Jewish and has a lot of friends that are extremely, devout, practicing. I practice. I don't use electricity on the Sabbath, on Saturdays. So what will happen if we have some AI chip, that we download Neuralink style into our brain and it's powered, and are you allowed to use it on the Sabbath? It's a question. And then if you're not, and if you don't, then will that create, multiple classes of, these humanoids that are cybernetic interfaces of, man and machine? But nevertheless, even without that, do these things have values? What are your obligations as a human to the AI itself? If we really get to, Turing test, Turing completeness, AI complete, can we turn it off? Can I say that, Bart, you've been a bad Bard or a bad chat bot, and shut you down? I know I wouldn't do that with my Brybot, the custom-made bot that I'm working on. So I have had on Max Tegmark and Nick Bostrom, who are the most, kind of some of the most, renowned experts in the implications of artificial intelligence. Max was on twice, and his book is about being human in the age of artificial intelligence, Life 3.0. And then, of course, Nick Bostrom wrote about it in Superintelligence and kind of the ethics of the simulation environment. So I've thought about that too. Yes, do we turn off a simulation? Can you make it better by giving it the visceral sense that led, for example, Einstein to come up with the theory of general relativity and the Einstein equivalence principle? Do you throw the computer out the window and say, this is free fall? Do you blow it a capacitor every now and then to teach you what pain feels like if you're trying to simulate, hostage negotiation scenarios? I don't know. These are very, very interesting questions. Okay, I can do without Sean Carroll, says Cool Cat. He's interesting, fails to support his fellow academics. With regard to the book and peer review system, pissed me off. Yeah, Sean and I don't see eye to eye and everything. No, I mean, either, but he's always interesting to talk to, and, we disagree about, again, the thread of Donald Trump seems to come up all the time with these academics. But we often talk about things that I do it better. Now, I want Elon to go super deep on AGI and the dangers of this. By the way, Sam Harris has a video. Then Stephen Devine says, get Lee Cronin on. No, you want to? Yeah, I do want to. I've had him on multiple times. We did a debate on Kurt Jamungo's channel. That was fun. I'll have him on again. What popular cosmic theories are too big to test or create experiments for? That's a great question. We can't actually create any cosmic theories and test them in the laboratory. We can replicate aspects. You often hear this, physicists create the biggest explosion since the Big Bang, the Large Hadron Collider, or the Large Hadron Collider could make, black holes, and they're very different. It is true that their temperature is equivalent to the 13 tera electron volt energy, center of mass energy that the Large Hadron Collider was recently upgraded to. But that's pitifully small compared to the, 10 to the 16th GeV energies that the yearly universe featured if inflation took place. So, it's true. It's at some time in the universe's history, it was about as warm, the entire universe was as warm as this fire behind me. At some time in the early universe, it was as warm as the sun. But that doesn't mean that you recreated the universe. And so it's difficult to think of doing an experiment at all in cosmology where you can actually have a, random, controlled test, or you could have a variable that you have control over and one that you can leave unperturbed. So you can't actually do experiments like you can in chemistry or biology. You give a frog some kind of chemical and see what happens to it, and then you have a control frog. You don't do that to it. So we can't really do experiments at all in astronomy, and certainly not in cosmology, where there might only be one universe. Astrology again asks, does academia need to adopt more humility? Absolutely. I'm worried about academia, and the concern that we have really rests on, whether or not we have an appropriate attitude towards our funding agencies. And by that, I don't mean the National Science Foundation or the Department of Energy. I mean you all. I mean the public, because we're living in an age. And I didn't get to my biggest fear, which has to do with effectively the ultimate undermining of trust in science. And maybe with that, I'm going to ask I'll answer two more questions, and then I got to go. So that is that when scientists exclude the general public from what they're doing, they do something very dangerous, but not just dangerous for the public. They do it. It's dangerous for them as well. There's a self-interest to scientists to do communication about what we're doing to the general public. Otherwise, it's a huge waste of time. And what I'm worried about is that so many of my colleagues think that what they do is so far above anything that I'm doing, say, at this YouTube channel. And I know that some of my colleagues are watching this right now and saying, well, you should be back in the laboratory. Maybe they're right, but I spend an awful lot of time in the lab and mentoring students and traveling and going to these telescopes and analyzing data. And this is kind of an outlet to me that makes me a more well-rounded scientist. So I think I should have more competition. There should be many more people like Andrew Huberman. I can't think of too many people who really do this. So Sean Carroll, who does it, these are active faculty members, that are scientists doing research. Mitch is not doing science really very much anymore. I think he is technically still a professor in New York City College. And then Sean Carroll, Andrew Huberman on the biology side, Eric Weinstein, he doesn't do his podcast anymore, although Gibbon Fox says he loves my conversations with Eric the best. Thank you. I enjoy them a lot too, especially now again in person. Right now I'm blanking on others that do it. Brian Cox does stuff, but he's not really doing much in the way of theories and observations and so forth. So very few people at the cutting edge, and that's what makes it so hard, is that through the authenticity, you want the scientist who's doing stuff in the field, on a classroom or on a computer or what have you. You have Jan Levin as a friend of the show and a friend of mine, and she has her outreach outlet, which is great, called Pioneer Works in Real Space, in physical space, in Brooklyn, in Red Hook. You can go visit it. Maybe I'll be there someday. So we need more of that. And if we don't, I think science itself will be at risk. People will stop trusting us. And that'll be really bad for us. And so I think that's the biggest danger, because once science gets co-opted, we've seen this happen a lot in the last few years. Shut down STEM, protesting over George Floyd, shut down the journals Nature and Science and Academia and My Experiments. They were shut down for a day. And social justice is not to be ignored and so forth. On the other hand, you have things like Scientific American, which just publishes complete nonsense nowadays. Publishing, endorsing political candidates. Again, it only goes in one direction. I'm waiting for just one scientific outlet to just come out and say, not only is Trump not a danger, but and I'm not saying I believe this, but it would be really interesting. I mean, shouldn't it be the case? Like, if he's so evil and so bad, then why didn't the world get destroyed, and why didn't autocracy come into play You might say he's incompetent, but he can't be simultaneously a Machiavellian villain and also incompetent, right? So anyway, science is at great risk. People don't trust in science. When you have people not being able to make basic scientific statements without fear of getting canceled, it's quite terrifying. And if we live in an anti-scientific age where people don't believe in God and they don't believe in science, as a kid don't know who to trust, then I think it's game over. So academia plays a huge role in that because every serious scientist has a PhD. I know there are many scientists who don't, but whatever. The ones that are at R1 universities, the teaching and doing research, they all have PhDs. What do you know about a PhD? He or she went to college and they went to graduate school. So academia is upstream from these impacts of science on culture. It's very dangerous. Lots more questions. There's tens more questions. I really appreciate you all, and I appreciate the statement Patrick saying, I watch all the big YouTube scientists. Brian does some of the best interviews. I always come back to Brian for real information. Thank you so much. Poindexter, I believe more than ever your commitment to scientific integrity is genuine. I love your mantra. Always be curious. ABC, that is my mantra. I got to break that out. Your questions are the best part of the interviews. Congrats on 100K. The question is the answer. Wow, that is cool. Intangible says, you are my favorite science communicator just by a variety of quality guests you engage in the you break down nation topics. Thank you so much. 111 subscribers, 1,000 subscribers. Congrats all around. Brian Keating is kind of looking like Buzz Lightyear. Mike Rose, love that. Yeah, I got the buzz cut. Kind of went in and said, give me the Andrew Huberman / Lex Friedman. And then he says, to infinity and beyond 200K. Well, let's make a date for that. Let's make a date for even before 200K. Let's make a date at 150,000. I will see you then. Answer more of your questions. Please send them to me. I love the questions. You can send them to me anytime. There's even a way you can leave a voice message on my website, briankeating.com. Sign up for the newsletter because that's the only thing I have complete control over. I can send you guys things, links to my books, free giveaways, samples, meteorites, ebooks, audiobooks, all those cool things, okay? Love you guys all so much. Thank you for allowing me to have this platform, and I hope I will never take it for granted. And I'll continue to have on controversial people. Like I said, Jordan Peterson is coming on the show. I'll always ask your opinion. Doesn't mean I'll respect what you say because I have my own free volition. But I want you to know how much your support really means to me, and that how much I rely on you to keep the channel going. So please share it. Okay, love you all so much, and I thank you all so much. Take care. See you at 150K.